Hey, what's up guys? Gons here for the Face Like the Sun YouTube channel. I wanted to talk about teleportation in the Bible. I know it sounds a little crazy, but bear with me. If you haven't seen this in the Bible, I think you'll be pleasantly surprised. And it's one of those topics that I'm going to cover in the documentary about the supernatural worldview. But to start off, what is teleportation? According to dictionary.com, teleportation is to transport a body by telekinesis. That's how it's defined here. But if you break down the word, it's pretty simple. You have the Greek tele, which means far off, afar, at or to a distance. And portation or port, there's different definitions for that. One is a gateway in Old English, portal, door, gate, entrance. Another one is to carry. Another one is the wine. That's not what we're talking about here. And also, as most of you might know, a harbor or a haven, a port where ships land and administer trade and stuff like that. But for this purpose, port means to carry or a gateway or an entrance. And so teleportation is moving a body or a thing from one place to another. And most of the time, when we think of teleportation, we think of instantaneous transportation, something that seems supernatural, something that seems within the realm of science fiction. But there are some passages in the Bible that really do make you wonder what's really going on. Now, first off, I'm going to start in the Old Testament here. In 2 Kings 2 verse 11, we read about Elijah being taken up in a whirlwind. It says, "And as they still went on and talked, behold, chariots of fire and horses of fire separated the two of them. And Elijah went up by a whirlwind into heaven." Now, of course, it says here he went up to heaven, but it's really interesting because in Matthew 17:3 and other places, parallel passages in Mark and Luke, during the transfiguration of Jesus, we see, "And behold, there appeared to them Moses and Elijah talking with him." And Moses and Elijah just appeared on the mountain where Jesus was transfigured. And some researchers have speculated, for example, Gary Stearman in his book, Time Travelers of the Bible, that what if Elijah here was literally transported from one place to another in terms of from what's recorded in 2 Kings 2 into a different moment in time and place where he appears again in Matthew 17:3. Now, it's not clear, but it is interesting because it appears that time and space are under the control of God and they operate differently as it goes into the higher dimensions, into the heavenly realms. And that's why Moses and Elijah are able to appear in front of Jesus during his transfiguration. And there's a lot more to that I'm not going to dig into here, but the basic premise here is that there is some kind of teleportation taking place, Elijah moving from one place and time to another. Now that's a really loose example, but there are more specific examples here, and it pertains to Jesus. Now, first off, in the book of Mark, chapter 16, verse 14, it says here, "Afterward, he appeared to the 11 themselves as they were reclining at table, and he rebuked them for their unbelief and hardness of heart, because they had not believed those who saw him after he had risen." Now, this is after, again, he had risen, and here in Mark 16, it says that he appeared to the 11. Now, if we dig into the word here, appeared, it's the Greek word phaneru, I make clear, visible, or manifest. Figuratively, it means to make plain in open view. But why is this of significance? Well, there are some parallel passages that seem to indicate a little bit more here. In John 20, verse 19, it says, "On the evening of that day, the first day of the week, the doors being locked where the disciples were for fear of the Jews, Jesus came and stood among them and said to them, 'Peace be with you.'" And then a few verses later, in verse 26, 8 days later, his disciples were inside again, and Thomas was with them. Although the doors were locked, Jesus came and stood among them and said, "Peace be with you." John chapter 20 ends with verse 30 and 31. "Now Jesus did many other signs in the presence of the disciples, which are not written in this book, but these are written so that you may believe that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of God, and that by believing you may have life in his name." So what we have here is Jesus appearing inside where the disciples were, either walking through a wall or just simply appearing in front of them. Why would they mention the doors being locked if Jesus just came and stood among them and said, "Peace be with you"? This is teleportation. Jesus himself is moving from one place to another instantaneously. We see it as a simple miracle, but I think in the modern sense, when we start looking at this, it's clear that this is teleportation happening. Now, there's one more place that's even more fascinating to me. In Luke 24, Jesus appears to two men on the road to Emmaus, which is in Jerusalem. And while they were talking about what was going on, this is right during the crucifixion and the resurrection, Jesus is said to draw near them, and while he began talking with them, the two of them didn't recognize Jesus. And that's a whole different thing that we'll talk about in another video. But it wasn't until the breaking of the bread when the two realized that the man they were talking to was the resurrected Christ. And it was at this moment that we see something very interesting. Luke 24, verse 31. And their eyes were opened, and they recognized him, and he vanished from their sight. The word used for vanished is the Greek word aphantos, and it means disappearing, invisible, hidden. It comes from alpha and phino, which means I shine, become visible, appear, I become clear. So again, in this moment, after they recognized that he was the Christ, the resurrected Jesus, he just simply vanishes. And again, for a lack of a better term, this is teleportation. Now, there's one more place that I want to talk about, and this comes from Acts chapter 8, verse 38 through 40. And this is the section that talks about Philip and the Ethiopian eunuch. But interestingly enough, in the last couple verses, here's what it says. And he commanded the chariot to stop, and they both went down to the water, Philip and the eunuch, and he baptized him. And when they came up out of the water, the Spirit of the Lord carried Philip away, and the eunuch saw him no more, and went on his way rejoicing. But Philip found himself at Azotus, and as he passed through, he preached the gospel to all the towns until he came to Caesarea. So again, the Spirit of the Lord took Philip, and the eunuch didn't see him anymore. He just disappeared. But Philip found himself in Azotus. And if you look earlier in the passage, Philip is told to go down from Jerusalem to Gaza, and that's where he met the Ethiopian. Philip is carried by the Spirit of the Lord from Gaza to Azotus. Now, Azotus is modern-day Ashdod, and this is around 40 miles in distance. And according to Scripture, Philip simply found himself in Azotus. And seemingly it was instantaneous, because verse 39, when it talks about God snatching up or taking away Philip, the word is harpazo. It's the same word that's used for the rapture. And it means I seize, snatch, obtained by robbery, basically to take away. And the eunuch saw him no more in that instance. So again, what we have here, for a lack of a better word, is teleportation. And this takes me to the passage Colossians 1:16 and 17, where it says, For by him all things were created in the heavens and on earth, visible and invisible, whether thrones or dominions or rulers or authorities, all things were created through him and for him. And he is before all things, and in him all things hold together. So God created both the visible and invisible realms. He also holds things together. As the author of creation, it's no surprise that he is able to do this in his resurrected state here, in his glorified state. Now, it's interesting because what science is starting to figure out now is that teleportation is possible, but they're at a very early stage in understanding how this works. According to Futurity.org, an article published on October 1st, 2015 states why teleportation is no longer science fiction. And you can go through the article here. They talk about how they have basically been able to understand quantum teleportation as an important building block for quantum computing, quantum communication, quantum networks, and eventually the quantum internet. And while the theoretical proposals for a quantum internet exist, the problem for scientists is that there's still debate over which technology provides the most efficient and reliable teleportation system. And again, they're using technology, they're using science to try to understand this or access this ability to teleport. But again, based on First Colossians here and other passages, it's clear that God's the author. He's the one that holds everything together. And so, of course, God incarnate, Jesus, is able to do things like walk through walls or just appear or disappear. This is all part of his creation. He can do as he wishes in it. And it says here in 1 Corinthians 15, verse 20, but in fact, Christ has been raised from the dead, the first fruits of those who have fallen asleep. And this whole chapter here, 1 Corinthians 15, is about the resurrection of the dead, and it talks about the resurrection body and how we will be given imperishable bodies that will give us immortality, the ability to be in the presence of God without being destroyed. It talks about the difference between the natural body and the spiritual body. And I think when we put on the imperishable, the immortal body, we're going to have similar abilities in teleportation and things like that. I mean, again, it sounds ridiculous. It sounds almost beyond science fiction, but Jesus being the first fruits of the dead and showing us the kinds of things he's able to do really should get us excited, because we are promised similar things. And it's not something that we would use or do in the sort of new age sense of trying to ascend or become higher selves and things like that. That's all based on the works of man and our own attempts to reach, the higher levels of existence and things like that. No, that's not what's going on. This is actually God giving us new bodies, and Jesus being the prototype, showing us what it's like to be glorified. And even the name of my channel, Face Like the Sun, it's actually from Matthew 17:2, where it talks about Jesus' transfiguration and his face shone like the sun. So that's why from the beginning, I really had this idea of glorification and the supernatural part of this. And teleportation, just being able to appear and disappear in a flash in a moment, seems to be part of the ability of the resurrected body. So something to think about. If you haven't thought of this before, check it out, study it, come to your own conclusions. But let me know your thoughts in the comment section. Hope this is interesting to you. I'll be trying to do more topics straight out of the Bible instead of just talking about the news, which can be redundant. There's a lot of turmoil and bad things happening. I think every once in a while we just need to go into the Word and look at some of the cool stuff in there. So hope you guys have an awesome day. God bless.